Hello everyone. In this movie, I want to talk about scenario-based learning and how you can write scenarios into your courseware and help make your course a little bit more interesting. You know, we use a lot of different tools. We use games, videos, survey questions, polls, things like that. And this is just one more tool that you can add to your e-learning courses to help make them more interesting and help your learner to retain the content. So why use scenario-based learning? Well, it gives your learners an emotional connection with the subject matter. So if I'm creating e-learning for nurses to watch at the nurses station, that would be the kind of content that they would run into on a daily basis. Nothing obscure, but real world situations that they can really connect with. It helps encourage the learner to interact with the content. So if I'm giving them a scenario and giving them a choice between several different answers, it's encouraging them to think, and then again they're interacting with the content by choosing their possible response. Problem solving the learner can relate to helps to increase the retention of the content. So all of these are great reasons why you should be adding scenario-based learning. So let me give you some tips on how you can apply it. First, you want to make it engaging and emotionally centered. You want the learner to be able to relate to the content. So if you're preparing something for construction workers, you want to make sure that everything is readable to them. Any characters that you add might be dressed in the kind of gear that a construction worker might wear. Things like that, things that they can relate to. Make sure your scenarios are factual and real world. So situations they'll actually run into. You know, if you're doing something for a bakery, make sure that the kinds of scenarios you give them are things that an actual baker might run into on a daily basis. Nothing too obscure here. We want real world situations. If you're using characters in your scenarios, you want them to be familiar and realistic. I've given some examples already, but again, if it's a nurse, having someone who's wearing scrubs will make them relate to that character more than if it's someone who's in a suit and tie, for example. And conducting surveys before the course to get an idea of your learner's expertise level can also help when you're writing scenarios. Now, adding characters to scenario-based learning is something that people like to do. All of these I've actually used in courses over the years. The anteater is actually the mascot of UC Irvine, so I used this for a kind of tongue-in-cheek project that we did. But when you're working with characters, they can add visual appeal and they can help walk the learner through the course. So if you're setting up scenarios, it might be nice to have someone there, a character there, somebody there who can help walk them through and make them feel more comfortable. And work with your SMEs, your subject matter experts, to get realistic scenarios going. So if you're writing them yourself or if you're having someone else write them for you, make sure that they're factual and realistic. Let's talk about simplifying the storyline next. So keep your learner focused with simple, straightforward scenarios, nothing too fancy. Don't give elaborate backstories to your characters. They don't need to know any of that. Make sure you streamline it to just the information they need to be able to answer the questions correctly. So again, don't set the mood with elaborate details. You don't want to give them any of that information that's going to make it more difficult for them to answer. And finally, focus on choices and consequences your learner will understand. So you want to keep in mind that whatever choice they make, they're going to also have a consequence with that. So make sure all of that makes sense. Let's go through some examples of scenario-based learning. First, this is one I did for Stanford Hospital about 4 or 5 years ago. They're building a new hospital at Stanford, and so I created some scenario-based learning for the staff and faculty to be able to help their patients navigate. Some roads were closed down, some entrances were closed, and so forth. So we needed to give them some real-world scenarios. So I'm just going to randomly click on a couple here. So scenario number 1. An elderly couple had an appointment today and the garden entrance is the only entrance they know. How would you assist them? Well, the garden entrance was closed and that building is being eliminated. So again, if we were doing this in the classroom, we would talk about different ideas, but they would simply click here on view possible solutions, and then they would pick from a few different questions, and then it would give them some feedback on the question that they chose. So you can see that I have 5 different scenarios set up here, and if I just randomly go in and click on them, you can see the story for each one of them. And so then they would choose the possible solutions, and then there would be feedback based on the answer that they gave. Here's another example of a scenario. This is more of a visual scenario. So let's say that you were training staff working in a bake shop, and the customer chooses a pastry and wants to know what the ingredients are. So in something like this is more of a visual where you can just simply click on the cookie or the pastry. It gives you the name down here, but it might also have information down here, for example, the ingredient list. I just put the name in here just for this demonstration. But simply by going in here and clicking on them, and I just sort of made a nav bar, so to speak, with the different icons that take you to the different slides that talk about that particular idea. So those are just some of the ideas that I can give you on scenario-based learning. It really is a wonderful thing to add to your e-learning and a wonderful tool for you to have in your toolbox.